Former Vice President Cheney was quite critical of the president with a timeline of a decision on going forward in Afghanistan, saying that the president seems afraid to make a decision, that this delay hurts our allies and emboldens our adversaries. Wondering if there's any comment on that in the White House.
Well, I think it's a curious comment given. I think it's pretty safe to say that the vice president was for 7 years not focused on Afghanistan. Even more curious given the fact that a increase in troops sat on desks in this White House, including the vice president's, for more than 8 months. A resource request filled by President Obama in March. What Vice President Cheney calls dithering, President Obama calls his solemn responsibility to the men and women in uniform and to the American public. I think we've all seen what happens when somebody doesn't take that responsibility seriously.
Dick Cheney actually made a fairly specific charge. He said that the Bush administration had done a review of Afghanistan and Pakistan policy, and that they briefed the transition, and the transition asked them not to talk publicly about it, and that the policy that was announced in March reflected that review. And I wonder if
I have not looked at that review. I don't know whether what he describes is accurate. Jonathan, this was we would have been in what, year 7 of that? We would have been, again, we were 8 months from a commander's recommendation in Afghanistan to provide additional resources after spending a few days at his new post, writing a report back, landing, I presume, even on Dick Cheney's desk for additional troop resources.
So,
I mean, it's a little, I find it interesting that he's blaming us for something that he didn't see fit to do over, best I can tell, 7 years of a war in Afghanistan. Major.
Robert, is your point about the Bush-Cheney approach in Afghanistan that on the request for troops and the overall lack of focus, you would suggest there was a dereliction of duty to deal with Afghanistan?
I'm just saying that the focus was not on Afghanistan. I think
to the detriment of our efforts there.
I don't think it helped.
And when you said the nation has seen the consequences when the president doesn't take that responsibility seriously, is that an allegation you're laying at the feet of President Bush, that he did not take troop deployment?
I don't know what President Bush has said about this recently. I know what Vice President Cheney said last night, and I was referring to that.
So which war? What troop? I'm sorry to interrupt, but what troop effort are you talking about wasn't taken seriously?
I think you were asking about my response on Afghanistan, correctly? Yeah.
So that's a specific reference to McKiernan's request that said that specific troop request was not taken seriously.
It wasn't. Whether it was taken seriously or not, it wasn't filled. I assume since it wasn't filled, it was not taken seriously. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they filled unserious ones and didn't fill serious ones. That's a fabulous question for the vice president, who seems to have forgotten his role in the last 7 years of Afghanistan.
Is it proof of unseriousness to not necessarily agree with a request for troops submitted by a commander in the field?
No, I'm simply saying I think it's interesting that what the vice president is suggesting the president isn't acting on is what the previous administration didn't act on, right? There were half as many troops in Afghanistan under See, you must have another good idea, Bill. I just heard those chimes. There were half as. I mean,
got 6 down.
I don't know what the rationale is. Help me understand by asking the vice president how one goes from half as many troops as are now in Afghanistan under his watch to 68,000 to now wanting an additional 40 when you didn't want the additional troops that President Obama approved. I mean, how do you go from 68 plus when you didn't want 34 plus? Did you not want? I mean, it defies some modicum of logic to get. I didn't want to go from 35,000 to 65,000, but I wanted to go from 65,000 to 100,000. Fuzzy math. I guess.
On pay compensation and Ken Feinberg's role,